Welcome back. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. On the front of the Daily Mail, claims that campaigners plan to fight back against Keir Starmer's latest migrant scheme and support court cases brought by small boat arrivals chosen to be sent back to France. Brussels is to propose a levy on large companies operating in Europe as part of an effort to create new funding streams for the EU's €1 trillion common budget. That's on the front of the FT. As the third heat wave in recent weeks hits Britain, the Mirror reports how the good weather has given seaside towns a massive boost. That story is also on the front of the Eye. They have an exclusive report that claims ministers are looking at extending the boiler replacement scheme to include systems that both cool and heat homes. While the Telegraph says water companies are planning to use smart meters to increase prices in the summer in an attempt to reduce consumption during hot weather. Experts have said reckless choices by Chancellor Rachel Reeves risk plunging UK into a recession. That's on the front of the Express. Meanwhile, Angela Rayner has said she'll not be pushed around by the leading Labour trade union Unite after it voted to suspend the Deputy Prime Minister's membership and rethink its ties with the party. The Times is leading with the story that medical leaders have warned junior doctors they may never recover the trust of patients if they go on strike again, as polling suggests the public has already turned against them. And on the front of the Star, fed up clowns want us all to stop branding politicians clowns, as it gives the pranksters a bad name. Interesting. We're joined tonight by Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with the Telegraph and the potential that customers may have to pay more for their water use during summer months. This is a scheme that's going to be trialled. Where's the first area that's trialling this scheme?
It doesn't really especially say where it's going to be trialled, but there's going to be a handful of sort of a pilot, and it's going to take 5 years, so it's not immediate. Now, if you read the headline, you think, crikey, families are going to pay more for the water and heat waves. That's us right now. Oh, my God, that's lots of people. If you read into the story, yes, they're trialling how families use water, and there are going to be increasing prices after a certain point in order to encourage you to use less. The limits, it also, like with everything, it depends where you set that limit, doesn't it? And where you set the bridge as to where you think someone is using too much in their household or too little. The size of the house, the size of the family, all those things make a difference. But further on, it does talk about actually saying we're using extra fees for people who have gardener sprinkler systems. Not use a sprinkler in the garden when it's a bit dry, but have a system, buried irrigation system that sucks up loads of water. And swimming pools, all of which, of course, which are used by and use, purified, cleaned drinking water and throw it on the garden or splash around in it for no good earthly particular reason other than that you enjoy doing it, which is, I'm not saying I don't enjoy a swimming pool, but I don't have one in my garden. I think if you can afford to have a swimming pool in your garden and you're filling it up in a heat wave when it is naturally evaporating at quite a high rate anyway, maybe, and having to keep it topped up and everything else, then yeah, pay a bit extra because you are plainly using quite a lot more than the average bunny down the road. They're already, of course, a swimming pool owner would say, we're already paying more to fill up our swimming pool, but you should probably pay a premium because, water is at a premium.
Anita, does that sound fair?
Well, I mean, I was sort of like, gosh, this is going to be quite dramatic. And then I saw this part which talks about Thames Water, which plans to make customers who use more than 685 litres a day, which is an insane amount of water to use, which would be as much as 13 wash cycles in a washing machine or 8 baths, although there must be very, very deep baths if you're using that much water in a bath. But the point is that this is people who are using really quite a lot of water. And it says here in the Telegraph that the US and the parts of Australia already have this sort of prices increasing at times of scarcity. And I do think that we do have to have, when it comes to things like electricity and also water, more of an acknowledgement of high demand and low demand times. I know that financially that can be very difficult, but it feels like a more sensible way to triage the usage that we have now as a society, whether it's because of heat waves or for other reasons.
Yeah. Make people more aware of what they're
more
using
conscious.
and when they're using it.
Yeah, I mean, I lived in a
If
house.
you're having 13 wash cycles a day, you have other problems in your life.
Yeah, no, I definitely live in a house where my mother's all turn the lights off, iron off, that kind of thing. And I just think more awareness would be helpful, having lived with people who didn't have that approach to
That's me, you're describing me. I'm the one who turns all the switches in my house. The article's saying here that it's also feared that the meters could be used to penalise customers who disobey house pipe bans. Households that flout such restrictions face penalties of up to £1,000, although firms typically rely on neighbours to report any rule breaking and rarely issue fines.
Well, it's also possible if you have, say, a street and every individual water meter on that street is a smart meter, they'll be able to help locate where a leak is, to say that it's in the main, it's not any of the neighbours who are using it, or it's this particular house and the leak is somewhere on the other side of the meter, and help them track it down. So I don't think they'd be using it necessarily for imposing or enforcing hosepipe bans, but they would certainly see that one particular household's maybe using more than they ought to be, and to try and find a way perhaps to help that family to be using a bit less, and see if there's a leak within the system, if there's pipe problems, whatever the situation might be, because no one wants to be paying more than they have to. So it seems reasonable, but the Telegraph doesn't like it.
I don't think I like the snoopers charter bit of the neighbours monitoring your use. I think actually I do like the smart meter approach though, when they would say to you, well, look, you've used over 685 litres today, you know, it's a hosepipe ban, please buck up, or we'll charge
it's like
you more.
electric meters, though. It comes down to the technology and whether it's up to the job. Electric meters quite often require some kind of mobile coverage, which you don't have everywhere. Sometimes they're a bit flawed. You know, if the meter system is going to work, it can work well. But if it's just throwing it in, it's going to make a mess. Perhaps charging people for a leak that's in their street that's nothing to do with them. You know, I can see there being problems.
OK, Susie and Anita, for the moment, thank you very much. We are going to leave it there for the minute, but we'll be returning to you. Want to bring a bit more on the breaking news that we brought earlier regarding the India air crash. The preliminary report into that crash, it reveals that fuel to both engines on the Boeing 787 plane cut out shortly after takeoff. Joining me now is Tim Atkinson, a pilot and aviation consultant. Tim, thank you very much for speaking to us. Your thoughts, firstly, on the initial findings of this preliminary report.
Good evening, Gillian. Thank you for having me on. Well, first, I'm delighted the report has been published, because very often we see delayed reporting or absence of reporting. And in some ways, I'm also very pleased with the amount of information that's been disclosed. There's no analysis in this report, and the information disclosed presents as many questions as it does answers. Basically, it says that shortly after liftoff, the two fuel control switches, which command fuel either to be supplied to the engines or not to be supplied to the engines, were moved one after the other, 1 second apart, to the cut-off position, depriving the engines of fuel, and that is why the aircraft ceased climbing. And its kinetic energy, its movement forward, was translated into a gain in height and then a reduction in height, and then it crashed into the location where it was subsequently found. The reason for that, of course, is the crux of the matter. And I'm struggling really to explain this other than in the fairly obvious way. You know, like other accident investigators, I don't like conjecture, but there are very few situations or very few circumstances which would explain this. One would be an utterly extraordinary human error, an unintentional act. And the other, I'm very sorry to say, would be an intentional act, and that's not a suggestion or allegation. It's simply an analysis of the small amount of information that we have at hand at this moment.
But according to and relying on your expertise, it's a possibility that the fuel could have been cut off to both engines by accident. Is that what you're saying?
It would be a truly extraordinary kind of human error were that to be the case. The way that flight decks are designed and the way that pilots are trained and the nature of pilots, which is to find people and train them to act in certain considered ways, in ways that reflect the technical environment in which they work, all advise against the possibility that this was an error. And there are other things that advise against that as well, which are that if one considers, for example, the classification of error, which is around a correct kind of action on the incorrect switch, well, there isn't anything in the flight deck which is moved one after the other at that phase of flight. And so from a human factors point of view, there is no readily presented explanation for this being an error.
From the preliminary report, we know that one pilot asked the other why he cut off the fuel, and the other pilot responded that he did not do so. This is according to the report. Can we glean anything more from that snippet of conversation?
Well, it's really difficult, really difficult. I'm not sure. I would want longer to think about it. But the one thing that I've known for a very long time is that the absence of in-flight deck video recording is a huge problem for investigators. There are many cases, Air France 447, for example, the investigation would have been so enormously helped by a video recording showing who was doing what was being displayed at the time. Turkish 1951, the 737 crash at Amsterdam, we know certain controls were moved in the flight deck, but we don't know who moved them. And that was central to that investigation. And the use of video recording has been adopted in certain parts of the rotary wing, the helicopter flying industry, and I think it is well beyond time that it was introduced as a mandatory requirement in fixed-wing aircraft, because so many cases like this would be enormously easier to understand if there was a video recording that showed whose hands were where, whose head was pointing in which direction, who moved which switch, what was displayed in the flight deck. You know, when you've got an aircraft in a degraded technical state, a video recording will show which instruments have fail flags on them and which instruments are still working correctly. And I think it is well beyond time that there was a mandatory requirement for these for aircraft such as this, you know, commercial air transport aircraft, to be fitted with these video recorders.
Thus far, in this preliminary report, and I'll keep stating that that's all that it is at this stage, there's no recommendations for any action against the manufacturers of the plane or the engines or the model. That would suggest that that rules out technical error, doesn't it?
Well, it suggests that there's nothing about the aircraft itself that contributed to this event. There's been some discussion, for example, around the bulks on these switches, which are the devices that make it more difficult than it would be to move them to the cutoff position. So if you think about a typical light switch, all you have to do is press the off bit of it and the light turns off. We've all seen switches which have guards on them, where the guard has to be removed in order for the switch to be operated. These switches have a bulk, which means that the switch has to be manipulated in a particular way to be moved. But for one to be moved after the other with a 1 second delay between them, and for that to have to do with a problem with the switch bulk, seems to me to be absolutely extraordinary.
Tim Atkinson, pilot and aviation consultant, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure.
Well, still with us to take us through the papers, Susie Boniface and Anita Boateng. Just your thoughts quickly on what we've heard there from that aviation expert and pilot, Tim Atkinson, into this preliminary report, Susie.
Well, it's pretty shocking because it seems that if there's no human error and there's no technical error and there's a conversation about someone physically switching off the fuel, that it was somehow intentional. Pilots have their ups and downs and problems, and it's not unknown for them to want to take their own lives at times. To want to take the entire plane down is astonishing. There's been cases like that before. Obviously, it's a preliminary report and we don't know exactly what, but it seems that what Tim said there about having the video in the cockpit would have been crucial to know the context of that conversation between the two pilots. Why did you turn that off? No, I didn't. Well, then who did? Who was reaching across and flipping the balks and managing to make those switches go? Because that person has killed hundreds and hundreds of people.
Yeah, I think particularly that point about video I thought was particularly salient, because I think in some ways, like, if someone says, no, I didn't, you can kind of tell from the intonation, and if you're watching a video, kind of exactly, because it could be, no, I didn't, complete panic, or it could be, no, I didn't, I'm sort of lying. And it's really, I think, that actually having more information when these kinds of things happen, I think they do happen rarely, but when they do, obviously, there are huge and devastating consequences. That having more information, whether it's helicopters or planes, would be enormously helpful in these instances, particularly for the families who desperately want answers.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting to note that there aren't any visuals in the cockpit.
And there's no good reason for that at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine, I can remember many years ago when I were a wee young thing, and they brought in black boxes because of the number of accidents and terror attacks and so on they had, and they wanted to hear what was going on in the cockpit. But that was the only tech they had at the time. Cameras just weren't good enough. But now you do have that, and you can store that on a black box and find it later.
No, it's
there's no good excuse not to have it now.
Point. Let's return to our papers as was before we did that interview. Let's have a look at the Eye. Heat waves drive government to consider air conditioning grants. Anita.
Yes, so basically there is currently a grant for boilers, a boiler replacement scheme. Lots of people in the UK have very, very old boilers that are not very energy efficient. So these grants, they total up to 7,500. So they're looking at having boiler systems that kind of heat and cool. And I do think that the significant difference between the UK and the rest of the world when it comes to warmer weather is just really how much air conditioning there really is. I was in Dubai 2 weeks ago, and it was not as unbearable as here, even though it's 42 degrees, because of the air conditioning and the way that houses are built. So I think this would be a positive step, although of course the amount of energy that air conditioning requires is not insignificant. So we're in a slight cycle here where particularly the way we build houses is not really equipped for incredibly warm 34-degree type weather.
Yes, and the respite that people get during the summer months, not having a heavy winter bill, it would just be
It gets evaporated. And they talk about here as well about reviewing workplace heat rules. Now, I was in a school the other day. A lot of our schools, of course, huge banks of glass windows, flat roofs covered in black plastic. And I've got to say, it was absolutely unbearable. I did not know how the children and the pupils there were learning, because it was impossible almost to walk around without be fanning yourself the whole time, and how you can sit there and there needs to be some kind of funding, I think, not just for schools and businesses, but to retrofit homes and buildings that have been built in the 60s. You can't build all this stuff from scratch, as they often do in Dubai, but you have to be able to retrofit blinds, cooling mechanisms, install better venting. So a lot of those sort of institutional buildings, hospitals as well, are not created to deal with the weather that we're currently having to live with.
Anita, what's going on with Angela Rayner and the unions, Unite specifically?
Yes, so
Guardian.
Unite. This has been the long-standing bin strike. I'm sure your viewers will remember all the pictures of the kind of bins piled up in Birmingham. And so and Unite says that it's going to these pay cuts would mean 8,000 potential people in Birmingham bin workers, losing up to £8,000. So as a result, in their conference, they decided to effectively suspend Angela Rayner, Deputy Prime Minister's membership, and rethink its ties with the party. Now, Angela Rayner resigned her membership from Unite some months ago because of the tensions and row over this bin strike.
Well, she says that, but Unite have denied.
Oh,
that
have
claim.
they?
Yes.
That was not in this. It's not in the story. story.
Yes.
But
They said that's not the case.
effectively, it's clearly a sort of, either way, it's sort of a symbolic, we don't want you, we don't care type vibe. And what's really interesting about that is obviously Unite are a massive donor to the Labour Party. They gave £2 million in the year before the general election. So I think this is more than just a stunt. I think this is a symbolic fraying of relations and the target of Angela Rayner, not just because of her role as MHCLG secretary, in charge of housing and communities and local government, but also as one of the big voices that is massively in favour of unions in the parliamentary party. Does indicate, I think, some of the disquiet on the left side of the Labour Party.
How significant is this, Susie?
Well, there's a practical consideration. So in the year before the election, Unite gave Labour £2 million, which is not a small lump of money in British elections. And if they are withdrawing Token from board, then it comes to, you start asking about what happens with activists, what happens with the ground war campaign and local elections that are coming up in 2026. How's that going to impact on things? But you also have this suggestion. I mean, Unite is campaigning strongly against the winter fuel cuts and for the child benefit cap to be lifted and disability payments and so on. How do you campaign and get that change if you're not talking to the people who are supposed to be on your team, who are now in government? You have to do something. But I suspect Angela will quite enjoy looking like she's fighting the unions. I think it will work for her.
Susie and Anita, thank you both. Let's take a look at the weather for you now.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the current hot, sunny weather will continue over the weekend, with temperatures peaking later on. It'll be a little cooler on Sunday, ahead of more unsettled conditions arriving on Monday. However, the heat remains close by, with temperatures lifting again later in the week. It'll be a very warm and humid start to the day, with temperatures in some areas no lower than 20 Celsius. Low cloud over eastern counties will burn back soon after sunrise, but may linger around North Sea coast. For most, it'll be another dry day with extensive sunny spells.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.